A man spends his whole life disappearing into other people's problems, and you don't realize what he meant to them until they show up after he's gone. At 9:57 that Saturday morning, I stood beside my father's coffin and counted 12 people. Not 12 rows, 12 people. My name is Marcus Bennett. I'm 39 years old, born and raised outside Atlanta. And 3 days earlier, I had buried every illusion I had about being prepared for death. My father, Walter Bennett, was 67. Heart attack. Quick, clean, almost cruel in its efficiency. 1 minute, he was carrying groceries into the house. The next, my mother was calling me with a voice I didn't recognize. Now he lay 6 feet away from me inside a dark walnut coffin, wearing the charcoal suit he'd owned for nearly 20 years. Behind me were 120 chairs. 108 were empty. I checked my watch again. 9:58. The funeral started at 10. My wife, Danielle, stood beside me in a simple black dress, her hand wrapped around mine. Her thumb moved slowly across my knuckles. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded. That was a lie. We had called everyone. Family, old neighbors, men Dad had worked with, people from church, names my mother pulled from an address book older than our marriage. And this was it. 12 people scattered through a room built for 10 times that number. My older brother Darius stood near the first row, staring at the empty chairs. He gave a dry little laugh. Guess Dad never really had people. I heard him. So did Danielle. Her fingers tightened around mine. I didn't answer, because some sentences hurt worse when you suspect they might be true. Dad had never been popular, never wanted attention. He drove the same faded Ford pickup until the paint surrendered before the engine did. Wore work boots to restaurants. Bought shirts only when Mom threw the old ones away. He wasn't rich, wasn't famous, never ran a company, never had his picture in the newspaper. Walter Bennett was just Walter, a quiet black man with rough hands, a bad knee, and a habit of leaving the house whenever somebody called needing help. At least, that was the father I knew. Reverend Samuel Brooks approached me and glanced toward the entrance. "We can wait another few minutes." No, my voice came out flatter than I expected. If they wanted to be here, they'd be here. 9:59. Rain tapped softly against the stained glass windows. My mother sat in the front row, clutching one of Dad's handkerchiefs. She looked impossibly small. I stared at those empty chairs. Something bitter settled behind my ribs. A whole life. 67 years. And 12 people came to say goodbye. Then the doors opened. A tall black man stepped inside. Maybe 50. Gray at his temples. Dark suit wet at the shoulders. I didn't recognize him. He removed his hat and walked straight toward Dad's coffin. No hesitation. No searching for the right family. He already knew where he was going. He rested one hand against the wood and lowered his head. Then he whispered something. I was close enough to hear it. "You kept your word, Mr. Bennett." My chest tightened. Before I could ask who he was, the doors opened again. A woman entered with 2 teenage boys. Then an elderly couple. Then 3 men in work jackets. Then another family. I looked at Danielle. She looked back at me. Neither of us spoke. Outside, tires hissed across wet pavement. One car. Then another. Then another. Reverend Brooks moved toward the window. He stopped. "Marcus." Something in his voice made me walk over. I pulled the curtain aside. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Cars filled the church parking lot. More were turning in from the street. Headlights stretched through the rain in a line that disappeared around the corner. People were getting out everywhere. Men, women, families, young people, old people, hundreds of strangers walking toward my father's funeral. And every single one of them seemed to know exactly who Walter Bennett was. I didn't. Not really. By 10:07, there were no empty chairs left. People stood along the walls. More waited beneath umbrellas outside. Reverend Brooks had stopped trying to begin the service because every time he approached the pulpit, those wooden doors opened again. And every stranger who entered looked at my father like they had lost someone of their own. That was the part one couldn't understand. Because the Walter Bennett I knew had spent most of his life trying not to be noticed. Dad worked maintenance for the county for 32 years. He woke at 4:45 every morning, drank coffee black, and left before sunrise with a dented thermos beside him. No impressive title, no corner office, no retirement speech worth remembering. Just Walter. His Ford was 18 years old when he died. The driver's seat had a tear patched with silver duct tape, and the radio only worked when it felt like it. I once offered to buy him another truck. He laughed. "Marcus, This one still knows the way home. That was Dad. Everything had to be useful. Nothing had to be impressive. Growing up, I sometimes hated that about him. Other fathers wore polished shoes to school events. Mine arrived in work boots with grease under his fingernails. Other families took vacations. Dad took extra shifts. But there was another side to him I never understood. The disappearing. Tuesday evenings were the strangest. Dinner would be on the table when his phone rang. Dad would look at the number, wipe his mouth with a napkin, and stand. "Walter," Mom would say. "Won't be long." Sometimes he returned in 40 minutes. Sometimes after midnight. Saturday mornings were the same. A knock at the door. A phone call. Some name I'd never heard. And Dad was gone. When I was 16, I finally asked him, "Where do you keep going?" He was tightening something beneath the hood of his truck. "Places. That doesn't answer anything." He smiled without looking at me. Wasn't supposed to. That irritated me more than it should have. Years later, after Danielle and I married, I started noticing other things. Envelopes. Plain white ones. Dad kept cash inside them. $20. $50. Sometimes a few hundred. No names on the front. I once watched him slide $300 into an envelope while sitting at the kitchen table. "Who owes you?" "Nobody." "Then what's that?" "Something that needs doing." That was his answer for everything. Something needs doing. Someone needs a ride. Someone needs help. Someone called. Never who, never why, and never enough information to make any of it make sense. One Christmas, he disappeared before dessert. Mom had spent 2 days cooking. Darius was furious. I was worse. Can't somebody else handle it? I asked. Dad stopped at the doorway. His coat was already on. For a moment, he just looked at me. Then he said something I wouldn't understand until years later. "Sometimes you're the somebody else." And he left. I thought he was choosing strangers over us. Maybe part of me never forgave him for that. Especially after I became a husband myself. I wanted schedules, explanations, boundaries. Danielle understood Dad differently. Whenever I complained about another mysterious phone call, she'd tell me the same thing. "Your father doesn't like people watching him do good things." I'd laugh. "You make him sound like some kind of saint." "He's not." She'd smile. "He's just Walter." Now, standing inside that overflowing church, those words came back differently. "He's just Walter." I watched an elderly woman approach the coffin. She touched 2 fingers to her lips, then pressed them against the wood. Behind her stood a young man wearing a college graduation pin. Behind him, a mother holding a little girl's hand. None of them knew me, but they knew my father. The tall man who had whispered over Dad's coffin was still near the front. Our eyes met. There was something in his expression I couldn't place. Gratitude, pain, maybe both. Then he nodded toward my father. Mr. Bennett used to say something whenever anybody tried to thank him. I swallowed. "What?" The man gave a faint smile. "Some things don't need an audience." My stomach dropped. I'd heard those words before, hundreds of times. I turned toward the crowd filling the church. For the first time, I wondered whether all those nights Dad disappeared hadn't been taking him away from his life. Maybe they had been his life. And maybe the man inside that coffin was someone his own son had never bothered to meet. The last real conversation I had with my father ended with me walking away from him. 3 months before the funeral. 3 months before 12 empty chairs became a room full of strangers. I didn't know it would be our last argument. That's the cruelty of final conversations. They don't announce themselves. It was a Sunday afternoon in late February. Danielle and I had driven to my parents' house for dinner. Mom was roasting chicken. Darius was supposed to come, but canceled. Dad was in the garage. Of course he was. I found him leaning over an old Chevrolet with the hood raised, sleeves rolled past his elbows, a wrench in one hand. "That yours?" "No." "Whose is it?" Dad shrugged. "Kid from over on Campbell Street." I looked at the car. Bald tires. Rust around the wheel wells. Passenger window held up with tape. "You fixing it for free?" Dad kept turning the wrench. "He needs it for work." That meant yes. I should have let it go. I didn't. "You know Mom's been waiting all afternoon." "I know." Danielle and I drove 40 minutes. "I know that too." The wrench stopped. For years, I'd swallowed the same frustration. That afternoon, it finally came up. "You always do this." Dad straightened. "Do what?" "Make everybody else an emergency." His face changed slightly. Not anger. Attention. I kept going. "You'll leave dinner because somebody calls. You'll miss Christmas dessert. You'll cancel plans. You'll drive across town at midnight for people whose names we don't even know." "Marcus." "No." Seriously, when does your own family stop waiting? The garage went quiet. Somewhere inside the house, Mom laughed at something Danielle said. Dad wiped his hands on an old blue rag. You think that's what I've been doing? What else am I supposed to think? He looked toward the Chevrolet. Boy who owns this is 19. His mother died last year. If this car doesn't run tomorrow, he loses his job. I folded my arms. There it is. What? Another person who needs Walter Bennett. That landed. I saw it. But Dad didn't fight back. He never fought the way I wanted him to. That made me angrier. You know what I remember growing up? He waited. I remember waiting. My voice was louder now. Waiting for you to come home. Waiting for you to finish helping somebody. Waiting for one Saturday where your phone didn't ring. Dad lowered his eyes. For a moment, he looked tired. Not 67 tired. A lifetime tired. I didn't know you felt that way. How could you? We never talk about anything. He nodded slowly. That should have stopped me. It didn't. What are you trying to prove? Nothing. Then why? He folded the rag once. Then again. Because somebody helped me once. I almost laughed. That's it. No, he looked directly at me. But it's enough. I shook my head. You spent your whole life doing things nobody understands. And someday you're going to be gone, and we're going to be standing there wondering what any of it meant. Dad stared at me for several seconds. Then he said quietly, one day, you'll understand what I was trying to leave you. That stopped me. Leave me. He nodded. And immediately my mind went where most minds would. Money. Property. Some account. Maybe Dad had saved more than we knew. What are you talking about? He turned back toward the engine. Not today. There it was again. Another locked door. Another half answer. I felt something inside me close. Fine. I walked toward the driveway. Dad called my name once. I stopped but didn't turn around. Some things don't need an audience, son. I shook my head. Yeah, I've heard that before. Then I left. Danielle came outside 10 minutes later. She didn't lecture me. She just got into the passenger seat. You should call him tomorrow, she said. I will. I didn't. Tomorrow became Tuesday. Tuesday became another week. Then work got busy. Life did what life does. It convinced me there would always be another Sunday. 3 months later, my mother called. Dad was gone. Now I stood inside his funeral surrounded by hundreds of people I had never seen, hearing stories I had never heard. And his final words kept circling inside my head. One day, you'll understand what I was trying to leave you. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about money. I was wondering what my father had known that I didn't. Across the church, the tall stranger caught my eye. He reached inside his coat and pulled out an old white envelope with my father's handwriting across the front. One word, Marcus. The envelope had my name on it, but the stranger didn't give it to me. Not yet. He held it between 2 fingers, looked at the handwriting, then slipped it carefully back inside his coat. My name is Isaiah Coleman, he said. His voice was low, rough around the edges. I promised your father I'd give you something, but he was very specific about when. When Isaiah looked toward the coffin. After you understand who he was. That sentence irritated me instantly. Even dead, Dad was still making me wait for answers. Everybody keeps saying things like that. Isaiah nodded. Sounds like Walter. I studied him. Early 50s, maybe. Gray at the temples. Dark suit that fit well, but wasn't new. There was a thin scar running from beneath his left ear toward his collar. How did you know my father? His expression changed. The faint smile disappeared. Your father is the reason I'm alive. I didn't know what to say. Not help me. Not gave me a job. Alive. Before I could ask what he meant, someone touched my shoulder. A black woman in her 40s stood behind me with 2 teenage boys. I'm sorry, she said. Are you Marcus? Yes. Her eyes filled immediately. Walter talked about you all the time. That hit strangely. I'm Renee Carter. She placed one hand over her chest. Your father saved my son's life. I looked at the boys. The taller one lowered his eyes. Which one? She touched his shoulder. Jordan. Jordan looked 17, maybe 18. What happened? Renee opened her mouth, but another voice came from behind her. Excuse me. An older man stepped forward holding a folded program. Walter got me sober. Then another. He helped me find work. A woman near the aisle raised her hand slightly. He paid my rent when my husband died. Someone behind her said, he fixed my car for free for almost 2 years. The words started coming faster than I could process them. I looked at Isaiah. What is this? He shook his head. This is Walter. The church doors opened again. More people entered. Reverend Brooks had volunteers carrying folding chairs from the fellowship hall now. Metal legs scraped across the floor. Umbrellas stacked beside the entrance. Wet shoes squeaked against polished wood. The funeral hadn't even started. But somehow my father's life was already being testified to. I walked toward Renee. "Tell me about Jordan." She looked at her son before answering. 3 years ago, he stopped going to school. Jordan's jaw tightened. Wrong friends. Drugs. Fighting. I was working nights. His father wasn't around. She swallowed. One night, he disappeared. My chest tightened. Dad found him. No, Renee smiled through tears. Your father looked for him. For 2 days. Walter drove shelters, bus stations, parks, neighborhoods. He found Jordan sleeping behind a closed laundromat nearly 20 miles from home. I stared at her. Dad never told us. I know. How? He made me promise. Of course he did. Jordan finally looked at me. Mr. Bennett stayed with me that whole night. His voice cracked. He didn't preach. Didn't call me stupid. He just sat there. The boy rubbed his palms together. At sunrise he bought me breakfast and asked if I wanted to go home. I felt something heavy settle behind my ribs. I remembered that weekend. Dad had missed my mother's birthday breakfast. He'd arrived Sunday afternoon exhausted. I had judged him for it. Hard. Behind Jordan, the line kept growing. A nurse. A mechanic. A teacher. A man wearing a construction uniform. People from different neighborhoods. Different ages. Different lives. They weren't co-workers. They weren't one congregation. Most of them didn't even seem to know each other. I turned slowly, looking across the packed church. That was when the pattern finally became visible. There wasn't one. The only thing connecting these people was the man inside that coffin. Isaiah stepped beside me. How many? I whispered. He didn't answer. How many people did my father help? Isaiah stared toward the doors. You're asking the wrong question. I looked at him. What should I be asking? His eyes settled on mine. How many people did the people he helped go on to help? Before I could answer, Reverend Brooks touched my arm. Marcus. He pointed toward the entrance. People were standing 3 deep outside now. The parking lot was full. Cars lined both sides of the street. And through the rain, more headlights were coming. For the first time that morning, I understood something that frightened me more than those 12 empty chairs ever had. My father hadn't lived a small life. He had lived a life so large that his own family had only seen one corner of it. By 10:23, the church had run out of chairs. Not seats. Chairs. Every wooden pew was packed shoulder to shoulder. The folding chairs from the fellowship hall filled both side aisles. People stood against the back wall, beneath the stained glass windows, even beside the coat room. And they were still coming. Reverend Brooks stepped outside twice to ask people to leave the entrance clear. Nobody left. They simply moved closer together. I stood beside Danielle watching volunteers open the double doors and realized my father's funeral had become something none of us had planned for. The rain had weakened to a mist. Outside, cars covered the parking lot, the grass beside it, and both sides of the street. A police cruiser appeared at the intersection, then another. For half a second, I thought something was wrong. An officer entered and spoke quietly to Reverend Brooks. We've got traffic backed up 2 blocks. We're going to start directing cars into the school lot. 2 blocks. I looked at Danielle. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. 26 minutes earlier, I had been embarrassed that only 12 people had shown up. Now the police were directing traffic at my father's funeral. The absurdity should have made me laugh. Instead, it hurt, because every new face reminded me how little I knew. I walked outside. Cold mist touched my face. Across the street, families were climbing from cars. Some carried flowers. Others carried nothing. One man came in work boots and paint-stained jeans. A woman still wore hospital scrubs. 3 young men arrived together in matching warehouse uniforms. An elderly black couple walked slowly beneath one umbrella, holding each other's arms. Nobody looked important, but that mattered. These weren't politicians coming to honor each other. There were no television cameras. No executives stepping from black SUVs. No photographers. Just ordinary people. People like Dad. People whose names would never appear in newspapers. People who had apparently carried Walter Bennett somewhere inside their lives. I went back in. Reverend Brooks was standing near the pulpit holding something. An old black notebook. The corners were rounded from years of use. A rubber band held it closed. What's that? He looked at Isaiah before answering. Your father gave it to me 6 months ago. My pulse changed. For the funeral? Not exactly. He removed the rubber band. The cover opened with a soft crack. Inside were pages of names. Hundreds of them. No phone numbers. No addresses. Just names, dates, and short handwritten notes. I took the book. Dad's handwriting. Block letters. Heavy pressure. Black ink. The first page was dated 1995. 31 years ago. I ran my thumb beneath the first entry. Thomas Reed, April 17th. Underneath it, got him home. Next, Marlene Davis, June 2nd. Found a room. Another, Anthony Price, August 11th. First week covered. I turned the page. More names. More dates. More tiny sentences. Never explanations. Never amounts. Never praise for himself. Just records. Like Dad had been keeping track of unfinished repairs. Except these weren't machines. They were people. How long did you know about this? I asked Reverend Brooks. Not long. And Isaiah? Longer. I looked toward him. Isaiah stood near the cot, speaking with my mother. That bothered me in a way I couldn't explain. A stranger knew more about my father's life than me. I flipped backward. Then 2001. 31 years. This wasn't a retirement hobby. It wasn't something Dad started after we grew up. He had been doing it while raising us, while working, while paying the mortgage, while complaining that the electric bill was too high, while driving that ridiculous old truck because, apparently, there was always somebody else who needed the money more. I closed the notebook. My hands were shaking. Danielle noticed. Marcus. I spent years thinking he was leaving us. She looked at the book. Maybe he thought he was teaching you something. He could have told me. Her expression softened. Would you have understood? That one landed. Reverend Brooks stepped toward the microphone. The room gradually quieted. Hundreds of people. Standing room only. Others visible through the open doors. He looked at my father's coffin. Then at me. We're going to begin. I nodded. But as I opened the notebook one more time, something caught my eye. A name halfway down a page dated 11 years earlier. A name I knew better than my own. I read it twice. Then a third time. My mouth went dry. I turned toward my wife. Danielle was already looking at me. The name written in my father's ledger was hers. Danielle Carter. And beneath it, Dad had written only 4 words. She must never know. 4 words can change the temperature of a room. She must never know. I stared at my father's handwriting until everything around me became distant. The organ, the rain, the hundreds of people shifting quietly behind us. All of it disappeared. There was only that page. Danielle Carter, September 14th, 2002. She must never know. Carter, her maiden name. I looked at my wife. Danielle stood 10 feet away beside my mother, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. 11 years earlier, Danielle and I hadn't been married. We hadn't even met. Marcus, Reverend Brooks was waiting. The service was supposed to begin. I closed the notebook. Give me a minute. I walked into the hallway beside the sanctuary. Danielle followed. What happened? I opened the ledger and pointed. Her face changed. Not much, but enough. I saw recognition. You know about this? No, Danielle. I've never seen that book. That isn't what I asked. Silence. She looked toward the sanctuary, then back at me. Not here. My chest tightened. That was when Isaiah appeared behind us. She's right. I turned. You know too. Isaiah didn't flinch. Keep reading. I wanted answers. Instead, I got another instruction. Exactly like Dad. So I read. The next page carried more names. Caleb Morris. Got him sober. Tanya Green. Deposit paid. Eric Washington. Tools for first job. Monica Hill. Stayed until sunrise. No explanations. No heroic language. Dad hadn't written. Saved her. He hadn't written. Changed his life. Just what needed doing. Like replacing a belt. Changing oil. Tightening a loose bolt from the pulse of the throat. Then I started recognizing dates. October 8th, 2004. My 17th birthday. Dad had arrived late with mud on his boots. I remembered refusing to speak to him. Malcolm Jones. Found his daughter. December 25th, 2011. Christmas. Dad disappeared before dessert. The same Christmas I'd complained about for 15 years. Rosa Henderson. Heat restored. Kids home. My stomach turned. March 6th, 2018. Mom's birthday breakfast. The morning Dad vanished and came back exhausted. Jordan Carter. Stayed until he chose home. I looked toward the sanctuary. Jordan, the teenager I'd just met. Every resentment I had carried suddenly had another side. Not erased. Not excused. Just changed. That was worse somehow. Because anger is easy when you know only your half of the story. I kept turning pages. Some entries were almost nothing. Bus ticket, groceries, interview shirt, fixed brakes. Sat with him. Called every day. Then one stopped me. Leonard Price. No note. Only a date. And beside it, a small cross. What does the cross mean? Isaiah looked down. Someone Walter couldn't save. My fingers froze. There were 7 crosses in the ledger. 31 years. Hundreds of names. 7 crosses. Dad remembered those too. Maybe especially those. I finally understood why the notebook looked worn. This wasn't a record of favors. It was weight. My father had carried these people privately because he never wanted gratitude to become debt. Reverend Brooks stepped into the hallway. I nodded. 1 second. I returned to Danielle's page. September 14, 2015. She must never know. But beneath those words was something I hadn't noticed before. A tiny arrow. It pointed to the next page. I turned. There was no explanation. Only another name. Patricia Carter. Danielle's mother. And underneath, house safe. Rent covered. Then another line. Danielle, college account untouched. My throat tightened. I looked at her. Her eyes were wet now. 11 years ago, before she became my wife, my father had somehow entered her life. And whatever he had done, he'd made sure she never knew who was responsible. I closed the ledger slowly. Tell me what happened. Danielle wiped one tear from her cheek. I can't. Why? Her voice broke. Because your father made me promise. I stared at her. You just said you didn't know. I didn't know then. A chill moved through me. Then when did you find out? She looked toward Walter's coffin. The night before our wedding. And suddenly the ledger wasn't about hundreds of strangers anymore. It was about my wife. My marriage. And a secret my father had carried into his grave. Your father knew me before you did. Danielle said it so quietly I almost missed it. Behind us, hundreds of people waited for Walter Bennett's funeral to begin. But in that narrow hallway, with my father's ledger open between us, time seemed to stop. What happened? Danielle looked at the page. My mother lost almost everything in 2015. I knew pieces of that story. Her father had left years earlier. Patricia Carter raised Danielle alone, working payroll for a small trucking company. Then the company folded. No warning. No severance. Within 2 months, Patricia was behind on rent. Danielle was finishing college. I was going to drop out, she said. What? We couldn't afford both. She swallowed. Mom never told you that she was ashamed of that period. I looked down at Dad's handwriting. House safe. Rent covered. Danielle, college account untouched. How did he even know? Mom's car broke down. Of course. A broken car. That sounded like Dad. She was sitting in a grocery store parking lot crying. Your father stopped because he saw me. Danielle almost smiled. He fixed the car. For free. For free. I could hear Dad already. Something needed doing. But he noticed boxes in the back seat. Danielle continued. Mom was preparing to move out before the eviction. Dad asked questions. Patricia resisted. Dad kept asking. 3 days later, the overdue rent was paid. Groceries appeared on their porch. A mechanic offered Patricia temporary bookkeeping work. Then that job became permanent. And you didn't know? Not then. Danielle shook her head. Mom told me somebody from church helped. I believed her. I looked toward Isaiah. So how did you find out? The night before our wedding. That night suddenly came back to me. Dad had disappeared from the rehearsal dinner for almost an hour. I'd been angry. Again. Danielle continued. He found me outside the hotel. Dad told her the truth. Not because he wanted thanks. Because she was about to marry his son. He said he didn't want a secret sitting inside our marriage. My throat tightened. What did you say? I thanked him. She laughed once through her tears. He hated that. That sounded like him too. He told me never to tell you. Why? Danielle's face collapsed slightly. Because he didn't want you wondering whether I married you. Because I felt indebted to your family. I stopped breathing for a second. He said love shouldn't have an invoice attached to it. Dad, always turning life into one sentence. I looked at Danielle. You kept this from me for 11 years. I kept a promise. To him, yes. The answer hurt. But not because I thought she'd betrayed me. Because suddenly I understood how carefully my father had protected something I didn't even know needed protecting. My marriage. Before it existed. He never wanted credit, Marcus. Danielle stepped closer. Not from my mother. Not from me. Her eyes moved toward the sanctuary. Not even from you. That was the part that broke through. All those years, I thought Dad's silence meant distance. Maybe silence was simply the price he was willing to pay to keep kindness clean. No leverage, no gratitude demanded, no stories told at Thanksgiving so everybody could admire Walter Bennett. Just help, then disappear. I thought about our argument in the garage. When does your own family stop waiting? I had thrown those words at him like stones, and he had stood there and taken every one. He could have defended himself, could have listed names, could have told me about Jordan, about Patricia, about Danielle. He could have won that argument in 30 seconds. He chose not to, because winning would have meant exposing people who trusted him. My father let his own son misunderstand him rather than turn somebody else's worst day into evidence for his defense. I closed my eyes. For the first time since Mom died, I wanted one impossible thing. 5 more minutes. Not another year. Not another Sunday. 5 minutes in that garage. Enough time to say, I understand, but death doesn't negotiate. Reverend Brooks touched my shoulder. Marcus, it's time. We returned to the sanctuary. Hundreds of faces turned toward us. I sat beside Danielle. The service began, but halfway through the opening prayer, I noticed one man sitting alone in the very last row. Old, gray suit, weathered hands resting on a cane. He wasn't looking at the coffin. He was looking at me. When our eyes met, he reached into his jacket and removed another envelope. Then he held it against his chest. My father's handwriting was visible even from where I sat. And somehow I knew, whatever Walter Bennett had been trying to leave me, that old man was holding the final piece. The old man waited until everyone else had spoken. That took nearly 2 hours. One by one, strangers stood inside that overflowing church and gave me pieces of my father I had never known existed. A nurse whose tuition Dad helped cover. A former addict he drove to meetings for 18 months. A man who owned 3 restaurants because Walter once loaned him enough money to buy a used food truck. Nobody told grand stories. That was what made them hurt. Small things. A ride. A meal. A repaired transmission. A night spent sitting beside someone who shouldn't have been left alone. Tiny decisions that had somehow become entire lives. Then Reverend Brooks asked if anyone else wanted to speak. Silence. The old man in the last row stood. His cane struck the wooden floor. Once. Twice. Every head turned. He walked slowly down the aisle, gray suit hanging loosely from narrow shoulders. When he reached me, he didn't introduce himself. He handed me the envelope. My name was written across it. Marcus. Dad's handwriting. My fingers tightened around the paper. Who are you? The old man looked at Walter's copy. Name's Elijah Freeman. Did my father help me? A strange smile crossed his face. No, son. He paused. I helped him. That silenced something inside me. Elijah nodded toward the envelope. He told me you'd understand after today. I opened it. Inside was a single folded letter and a $20 bill. I stared at the money. $20. After hundreds of strangers. After the ledger. After 31 years of secrets. $20. I unfolded the letter. Marcus, if you're reading this, then Elijah kept his promise. I could hear Dad's voice in every word. He wrote about being 23, newly married, broke, before county maintenance, before the house, before Darius, before me. Dad had lost a warehouse job and spent 3 weeks pretending everything was fine. Then his truck died 40 miles from home. No money, no food, almost no gas. He sat outside a roadside diner wondering how he was going to tell Mom they couldn't make rent. Elijah had been working there. He looked terrible, Elijah said softly. Too proud to ask for anything. He bought Dad breakfast, then handed him $20. Dad refused. Elijah put it on the table anyway. What did you tell him? Elijah looked at me. I said if $20 ever becomes small money to you, don't bring it back to me. My throat tightened. What did you tell him to do? Give it to somebody who still thinks it's big money. I looked down at the bill. Dad's letter hesitated. He never found Elijah again. Not for decades. But he remembered. The first time Dad helped somebody, it was $20 for groceries, then a ride, then a repair, then rent, then tuition. The amount changed. The rule didn't. Help. Don't own the person afterward. Don't make them perform gratitude. Don't turn their pain into your trophy. Just keep it moving. I looked around the church. Suddenly, I understood Isaiah's question. How many people did the people he helped go on to help? This wasn't Walter Bennett's legacy. Not entirely. It had started before him. One tired young man. One diner. One stranger. $20. And somewhere between that table and this funeral, one quiet act had multiplied into hundreds of lives. Maybe thousands. I reached the final paragraph. Son, you once asked what I was trying to leave you. It isn't money. Money runs out. It isn't my house. Wood rots. It isn't my name. Names disappear. I'm leaving you something somebody left me. The responsibility to notice. My vision blurred. I stopped reading. For the first time that day, I didn't fight the tears. Danielle took my hand. Elijah rested both hands on his cane. Your father found me 6 months ago, he said. How? Elijah smiled. Walter was stubborn. A few people laughed softly. So did I? It was the first laugh that didn't feel wrong. I folded the letter carefully and placed the $20 bill back inside. Then I looked at the hundreds of strangers filling every corner of that church. All morning, I had been trying to understand how my father could have known so many people. Now I understood. He hadn't collected people. He had passed something through them. And for 31 years, none of us had noticed the ripple spreading. Reverend Brooks stepped toward the microphone. Marcus, would you like to say something about your father? I looked at Dad's coffin. 3 months earlier, I had walked away before he could finish teaching me. This time I stood. I slipped the $20 bill into my pocket and walked toward the pulpit. I spent most of my life thinking my father was somewhere else when he should have been with us. The words came out before I could soften them. Hundreds of people stared back at me. Mom lowered her head. Danielle held my gaze. I gripped both sides of the pulpit. I was wrong. The church went still. I thought my father missed dinners, birthdays, Christmas desserts. I thought every ring calling into another stranger was more important than today. I looked at Walter Bennett's coffin. 3 months ago, I told him exactly that. My voice tightened. I wish I hadn't. Nobody moved. But my father wouldn't want me standing here turning guilt into another monument. A few quiet laughs moved through the room. I smiled. He hated monuments. I reached into my pocket. The $20 bill felt almost weightless. He left me something. I held it up. People leaned forward. $20. Confusion moved across several faces. I told them about Elijah, the diner, the broken truck, a 23-year-old Walter Bennett sitting 40 miles from home, too proud to admit he couldn't afford breakfast, and a stranger who noticed. Not a millionaire, not a foundation, not a church program. One man, $20. One act, I said. That's where all of this started. I looked across the room. At least, that's what I thought. Then I understood something. Elijah didn't start it either. His eyebrows lifted. Somebody taught him to notice. Silence. And somebody taught that person. I looked down at Dad. Maybe that's the point. The $20 wasn't an inheritance. It was evidence. Proof that goodness could travel farther than the person who started it. After the service, people stayed. For hours. They hugged Mom. They told Darius stories. They showed me photographs. Walter beside a repaired car. Walter at a graduation. Walter holding a toolbox. Walter sitting at a hospital bedside. In almost every picture, Dad looked uncomfortable being photographed. That made me laugh. By late afternoon, the crowd finally thinned. Rain had stopped. Sunlight pushed through the stained glass, laying strips of blue and gold across the floor. I helped Reverend Brooks collect the folding chairs. Then I saw them. The original 12. The chairs I'd counted that morning. Those empty chairs had felt like a verdict. I had looked at them and measured my father's life. 12 people. 67 years. I had been doing exactly what Dad never did. Keeping score. I carried the chairs toward the front. 12 in a row. Then I walked back into the fellowship hall. Danielle watched me return carrying one more. What are you doing? I placed it beside the others. 13. I took the $20 bill from my pocket and set it on the seat. Danielle stared at it. Why 13? I looked toward Elijah. He was outside speaking with Mom beneath the clearing sky. Because somebody came before Dad. Danielle slipped her hand into mine. We stood there without talking. For once, silence didn't feel like something missing. It felt full. A week later, I went to Dad's garage. The Chevrolet was still there. The one we'd argued beside. The 19-year-old kid from Campbell Street had been waiting for someone to finish it. So I opened Dad's toolbox. I am not half the mechanic Walter Bennett was. It took me 6 hours, 3 videos, 2 scraped knuckles, and language Dad would have pretended not to hear. But eventually, the engine turned over. The kid reached for his wallet. I shook my head. No, he stared at me. At least let me pay for the parts. I almost said something complicated, something worthy of Walter. Instead, I heard my father's voice. Some things don't need an audience. Just help somebody when you can. The kid nodded, then drove away. I stood alone in the driveway as his taillights disappeared. For 39 years, I thought inheritance was what remained after someone died. A house, money, a name. I know better now. Sometimes inheritance is a thing you are asked to continue. My father's funeral began with 12 empty chairs. By noon, hundreds of strangers were standing outside because there wasn't enough room for everyone whose life he had touched. But that's not the image I remember most. I remember 13 chairs in an empty church. 12 for the people we expected, 1 for the stranger nobody knew, and $20 resting in the sunlight, waiting for someone to notice.